Hey, girl.
Hey, girl.
Girl, I think the hot guy makes his debut in episode 3, but it might be episode 4, so hold tight. I will let you know as soon as he gets here.
I think I know who it is.
Okay, I knew you'd get there. Don't say anything. Just tell me let's let it be a surprise, and we'll figure it out together when we arrive.
Okay.
You know what we haven't done in forever?
We didn't do our song.
Jillian, Pennsylvania.
Patrick Hines.
Ba-da-da. You guys, before we get to the show, I'm going to remind you again, if you want more fun, more laughter, more hang time with me and GP, join us on the Patreon, you guys. Over 140 full bonus, hilarious episodes to download and binge right this second. It's like 80 million hours of content. It's where we do our series, girl.
All 58 episodes of Making a Murderer, Lorena, The Jinx, the first season of Serial, OJ, Madeline McCann,
The Staircase,
Tiger King.
Don't F with Cats, Tiger King. We're in the middle of McMillions right now.
Ooh.
Lacey Peterson, Menendez Murders, which is one of my favorite ones. I feel like I don't mention it enough.
You used to mention it all the time when we were like,
I know.
That was always your first one. I'm like, girl, I know, Menendez Brothers. But now it's like, you're coming back around.
That's right. You guys, you know where to go. It's patreon.com/truecrimeobsessed, or go to our website, click on the Patreon link. Also, we have a new podcast. You guys, we've got a lot of stuff going on. Go check out the network website. It's obsessednetwork.com. It's a brand new site. It's very cool. It's got all of our podcasts there. Mix and match, you guys. We got a lot more stuff coming up that I'm very excited to let you know about.
Yeah.
Anything from you this week, girl?
It's hot. Is there anything fun to say? No. I don't think there is, actually.
All right, girl, what are we talking about today?
We are talking about the most dangerous animal of all.
So we're doing episodes 3 and 4 for the second episode of our coverage of the most dangerous animal of all.
Right. So we're in 2004.
Although the case was considered closed and inactive, if anybody had a credible lead, they should contact this guy named Lieutenant John Hennessy in the San Francisco Police Department. So I called him, and when he answered the phone, I said, Lieutenant Hennessy, my name is Gary Stewart, and I have a story.
John Hennessy, we'll take your call if you have a real credible lead. Gary, are you listening? It's a real credible lead Hennessy's looking for, okay?
I love that Gary's like, so basically I called this guy up and I was like, hey, girl, I think the Zodiac Killer's my dad, girl.
Right, but he throws everybody under the bus in the process. He's like, so my mother was once married to Rotea Guilford, you know, like groundbreaking Rotea Guilford. Yeah. So the thing is, I'm looking for my father, and thanks to all this help from a Sergeant Butler, you might know him, I'm calling you today to let you know that my father is the Zodiac Killer. So lunch, or like, how do we do this? And so, according to Gary, John Hennessy's like, whoa, what?
Right.
And goes right to Harold Butler.
Yes.
And is like, I need Gary's father's file now, girl. No bullshit. Don't mess with me here.
Hennessy went to Harold Butler's office, and he asked to see my father's file. And Hennessy told me, Gary, your father's file was sitting on Butler's desk. But Harold Butler refused to let Hennessy see what was in that file.
His dad's file was on this guy Butler's desk.
Just sitting there with like a big spotlight on it. Like,
Exactly.
This is Gary's father's file. Like, what?
And he like slams his hand down on it and he's like, no, you will not see this.
Yeah, he was like, Sergeant Harold Butler of
Yeah.
the SFPD is like, no, John Hennessy, now get out of my office. I said good day, sir. And I'm like, I don't believe a word of this. And then Gary's like, but John, level with me. Has the Zodiac case been secretly solved?
Right.
And John's like, no, it's open, but Arthur Lee Allen was the prime suspect.
Yeah, and so this is where we learn about Arthur Lee Allen.
Arthur Lee Allen was the prime suspect in the Zodiac case, but he's denied to the day he died being the Zodiac Killer. And one statement he made was that you guys have it all wrong. I know who the Zodiac Killer is. He's a crazy man I met in a Atascadero State Hospital.
And Gary's like, ding, 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 ding. Guess whose dad was in a Atascadero?
Also, Gary, because no one's ever denied anything before.
Right,
Gary's
exactly.
like, well, it can't be Arthur Lee Allen because he said he didn't do it. So obviously, let's move on. And I'm like, Gary, you are so clearly new here. Like, of course he denied it.
Totally.
So then Gary gives this Hennessy guy his DNA.
Hennessy told me that they had a partial profile of the Zodiac's DNA from a stamp. And so that's what they were going to compare my DNA to. And I know that if this case is going to be solved, it's going to be solved because of DNA.
And so now we're back to the actual Zodiac case. And the Zodiac was like, I'm going to like follow a school bus and just like pick off these little kids as they get off the school bus.
In San Francisco, 2 more communications have been received from the Zodiac. School children make fine targets. I think I shall wipe out a school bus some morning. Just shoot out the front tire and then pick off the kiddies as they come bouncing out.
This was one of his most famous letters because it caused a panic. It's absolutely terrifying. And people were already in a panic thinking, oh my God, first it was kids on lovers lanes. Then it was a cab driver. Now it's it could be any of our kids going to school. I mean, the Bay Area was a wreck.
So the Zodiac wants to be seen as intelligent. And so he's writing these letters where he's making these literary references. And he writes this one letter in the style of the Mikado, which is a Gilbert and Sullivan operetta. They do a side by side where they show the guys singing the songs and they show the Zodiac letter, and it's word for word. It's so bizarre.
As someday it may happen that a victim must be found, I've got a little list of society offenders who might well be underground and who never would be missed.
Also, there's not a single second of footage they could play from that's not insanely racist. So it's just, you guys, it's so racist. They don't perform it anymore. It's so racist. But they needed to show how similar it was. And I was like, ooh, this is so cringy. This is so goddamn racist. Oh my God. I need a shower after. Oh my, it's 30 seconds. It's not even. It's just to show this. But I'm I feel uncomfortable. You can't do that.
But you know who loves it? Van and his family.
As I researched my father's life, I discovered that as a young boy, my father learned the Mikado when he and his parents were missionaries in Japan. I also got verification from his friend William Lomas that they listened to the Mikado at my father's home.
And of course, Gary is telling us this as another one of those little coincidences to connect his dad to the Zodiac.
Because he needs it. Okay.
Right.
So now, a few months later, Zodiac sends a Halloween card to reporter Paul Avery.
So it's October 27th, 1970. We're back in time.
So this was a big deal. It was the first time Zodiac actually threatened someone specifically, not just here are these people I murdered, which is horrible enough.
Yeah.
But Gary is there to say oh, you guys, there's a connection here. Don't you worry about that.
A few months after the Mikado letter, the Zodiac sent a Halloween card to Paul Avery, who was a reporter for the San Francisco Chronicle covering the Zodiac case.
So this is the Halloween card sent to Paul Avery from your secret pal. He was clearly indicating to Paul Avery that they knew each other. They had met before.
Gary is saying yeah, that's my dad, aka the Zodiac Killer, saying, I know you, girl. You were the guy that interviewed me that 7 years ago and called me balding and bespeckled and a pedophile and embarrassed me in the newspaper. So I'm coming for your ass.
Right.
And so, we're back to Gary, and he's saying that in the final years of the Zodiac's activity, we don't really know where my dad was. And I was spending a lot of time researching where was my dad during this time and after this time. And then he gets a letter from a friend of his dad's.
It was in a letter from him where he said, I'm sorry to have to inform you that your father is deceased. He died in 1984, and he's buried in an unmarked grave in Mexico City.
I know you've been searching for your dad for forever at this point, but I gotta tell you, he's dead. He died in 1980.
The way you said that. Gotta tell you, he's dead. And it's
And we wouldn't be laughing if he hadn't been garbage, but he was garbage, so who cares, girl?
He's a rapist and a kidnapper and an abuser, and I feel best news I've heard all day, actually.
I know. And Gary really fucking falls apart, you guys. And it's hard to watch, and he's getting really mad about the closure that he needed.
I would never have a chance to meet him. And I wondered, did he ever think about me? Before he took his last breath, did he ever think about me? Did I ever matter? So not having those answers that I really wanted, that closure, I guess it was just really sorrowful that I would never get that.
I remember reading about this unmarked grave in the book and thinking oh my God, is the Zodiac Killer buried in an unmarked grave in Mexico City?
No.
And then we see the unmarked grave. He finds out where it is. And of course he drags his lifeline, Zach, to Mexico City, and they go and have this really awkward, uncomfortable scene in the graveyard.
I have in my notes, Gary, aren't you exhausted? We're here at this unmarked grave, and he just goes, and we're just standing there, and you're right, it's very who's gonna be the first one to speak? And Zach is
I think he did you a great favor by abandoning you. Truly, you're lucky, in a way, that he made the decision that he made.
you could tell it's years of like, I'm just going to say it. I got to say it. Somebody's got to say it.
Yeah.
And he's like, you are so much better off without him. Why are we here? Earl Van Best Jr. is a piece of shit, Dad. Like, you should be grateful you didn't have to deal with him. Who knows what your life could have been like. At 3.5 months old, those first 3.5 months of your life sucked. Absolutely. But 3.5 months old, you got this loving, amazing family. We just had a barbecue last week and it was awesome. Potato salad for days. Like, what are we doing here? Like this guy's a nightmare. Not the Zodiac, but a nightmare. Like, move on, Dad.
Poor Zach has had to give his dad these kinds of pep talks since he was 4 years old.
And Gary's like screaming and he's like talking about forgiveness.
I hope that I'd have the chance to bring you here because I wanted you to see that the love of the Stewarts and God's plan for my life didn't give you this as a legacy. Knowing that I went there with my dad and helped my dad make peace and say goodbye. I forgive him.
And I'm like, what is happening? This man is unraveling before our eyes. And I'm like, where the fuck are the producers? You guys stay tuned. I know exactly where they are.
So we're back in the States and we're back with Judy. And Judy's like,
in 2014, I hadn't seen Gary in a while. And so I proposed that we got together for lunch for 2.5 hours. We had an amazingly wonderful time. We talked about everything.
the lunch ends and Gary's book is published. The Most Dangerous Animal of All, like my search for I was looking for my dad and I found the Zodiac Killer, comes out. It's like a New York Times bestseller. Judy had no idea. It was a week ago that they had lunch and he didn't mention it.
Judy finds out about it because People magazine wanted a quote or wanted to do an interview with her. And she's like, how did he not tell me this at lunch? And so she texts him. She's shocked beyond belief. Then he's shocked that she's shocked.
Right.
And I'm like... Dude.
Yeah.
And Judy is like totally, completely floored. And then Susan, the co-author of this book, Susan with the big hair, she's like...
And the gun.
And the gun shooting into nothingness. You guys, like, responsible gun owners, stand up. She should not be doing that, correct? You can't just shoot with no rhyme or reason into the tall grass.
I know.
You can't do that.
This is why I don't hike, girl. This is why I don't go on hikes for random people just in the woods shooting their guns at nothing.
Wayward bullets from a pink plastic shotgun or whatever she had.
Totally.
So Susan's like, I gotta tell you, it was amazing that we got a big name like HarperCollins to publish this bullshit. And I'm like, Susan, yeah, me too, girl. But Michael Signorelli, the editor of the book, is here.
You guys, I do love these documentaries that like they get everybody. The producers make everybody feel like the producers are on their side and they all spill the tea. And the producers have no allegiance to anybody. Because Michael Signorelli, he says a lot of things, but he's like, look.
With Gary's story, our question was, does he deserve to present his story and share what he believes based on this evidence? And the answer to that is 100% yes.
It's a cash grab. You're pronouncing cash grab wrong. This story is insane. And Michael's like, Gary deserves to tell his story. It's super believable. He should tell the story. And I'm like, Michael, again, don't lie to me. Like, just say it to my face. This is insane.
The thing that made me the most mad in this section was when Gary's like,
people from around the globe were saying, I feel for the guy, finding out his dad was this evil person, but we're glad he did. The families of the victims now have closure.
Don't do that.
You re-victimize these families.
Yeah, and he's back to just speaking for everybody again. Like, that's how we met him, when he just generalized about people who give their kids up for adoption or adoptees. Like, he spoke for all of them, and he had shitty things to say. He's kind of doing the same thing where he's like, all the families, they love me. Right. I did a great thing here. And I'm like, think about it. This was 50 years ago. I don't know if these families are still alive.
Right.
What are you saying?
But we're right back to Judy, and like Judy is saying,
A lot of the speculation in the book was preposterous.
the speculation in the book was preposterous. She says it again, her favorite word.
Yes.
Judy had two husbands. One was Earl Van Best Jr., one was Rotea. And she's saying like,
I was so offended by the way Gary came to the conclusion that my husband, Rotea, must have interviewed Van, and that the San Francisco Police Department were trying to cover up for Rotea.
Right. And she's like, I'm so offended by this. He completely betrayed my trust. He made up these like intimate conversations and he shared the real intimate conversations they had. She's like, he twisted words, he twisted facts, he jumped to all these conclusions.
Right.
And now, like, again, like, Gary, if you're gonna lie, and you're lying a lot, if you're gonna do it, to me, it just seems like, in what universe, like, where do you get that the SFPD is covering up solving one of the biggest open and inactive cases that has ever never come across anyone's desk.
Right.
And because like everyone wanted to take the credit for it, which was like part of the reason why it was so convoluted and technology back then and paperwork was lost. Don't you think the SFPD wants to be like, we did it?
Right.
Tosky and Armstrong, they did it.
Right. And so we're with Sister Lynn, we're with Judy's sister Lynn, and she's like,
I was very shocked to learn that Gary was trying to make something of the fact that Rotea was a police officer at the same time that the Zodiac murders were occurring. Because he became a homicide inspector in 1971. That was a year after the Paul Stein murder happened in San Francisco.
this is insane, and all of the facts are wrong. Gary is saying in the book that Rotea was working the case. He wasn't working the case.
Gary says to us, he says it, he looks me right in the eye, he says it to my face, girl. He goes, you know, here you have the first black detective in the force, and then it turns out he interviewed Zodiac and let him go? That's a disgrace. And I'm like, Gary, look, Gary, sit down. We got to talk, Gary. Because I was having some sympathy for this person who's clearly not well.
Right.
He's going through a lot. He's clearly not well. It seems like I know too much about him. But like this racism, dude, you gotta go.
Right.
Can't do that. You can't just like throw out this and like try to tarnish this guy's legacy who did a lot of good work and activism for the black community, for the gay community. Like, Gary, for your own personal gain, what are you doing?
It's just amazing. And like he just has such blinders. He won't be made to think anything else.
Right. So Judy calls the publisher and she's like, look.
At what point do you change true crime to fiction? And Gary took that as a threat and he was furious.
Gary hears that. I'm sorry, girl. I'm seeing shades of you here. Goes to 1,000,000.
Yeah.
And here's Judy being like, things aren't true. Like, can something be done here? What's going to happen? Gary hears that as a threat to sue him and take him down. And he like completely flies off the handle.
Yeah. And he like cuts ties with Judy and he's like,
I felt like she had abandoned me all over again. I don't need her. You know, I lived 40 years without her. And Christy would always be my voice of reason saying, you need her.
as he's saying this to us now, he's like spitting with anger. He's reliving all of this anger now.
He is. And then Christy, his current wife, is here with us.
Yeah.
And she...
Christy, blink twice, girl. You okay, girl?
Well, she says so much here.
I know.
She doesn't have a lot of screen time right now, but boy, does she say a lot. She's like...
When things aren't right with Gary and his mother, things aren't right in Gary's world. I think it's the whole abandonment issue will come back to haunt him, and he responds in a destructive manner toward her.
There's just a lot to unpack here
Yeah.
because he needs everything to be perfect, perfect, perfect. And what perfect means is believing him and going along with him 100% of the time, because he will turn around and say, don't abandon me. You're abandoning me. Don't do that. Don't do that. And that is a really fucked up, abusive thing to do to somebody else. So Christy, run away. Right. Get the hell out of there, because there's no way she can live up to these expectations. There's just no way.
Yeah, and so now we meet Michael Butterfield, and he's the founder of a website called ZodiacKillerFacts.com.
That's the shitty website he was on earlier.
Totally. And it's like, you know, a lot of these like old Zodiac killer sites are like shittily made, but they have good information. And whether or not you think it's good information, like there is a whole online community of people who are like actively trying to solve the Zodiac. Some of them are regular people. Some of them are people with too much time on their hands. Some of them are problematic, but like...
They call them zodiologists. There's a word.
I know.
I'm sitting here thinking like they're just all armchair detectives, right? That's what we call them?
Yeah.
No, zodiologists. What?
Do you think that they would officially call me a vodkaologist?
Absolutely, girl.
Thank you.
Co-vodkaologist here signing off on that.
Well, the thing about it was that, like, of course, there's this huge online community, and he publishes this book. It's this, like, huge bestseller. He's on all the talk shows. And, of course, everybody in the Zodiac community has never heard of Earl Van Best Jr. They've never heard of Gary Stewart. They don't take him seriously, and they are coming for him on the internet.
Well, Gary says something, and he goes...
The fact that they had never heard of Earl Van Best Jr. ever before, I think was kind of humiliating for them.
And I'm like, Gary, say that again.
Right.
Because it doesn't make the point you think it does. You know what I mean? Like, he thinks that's a gotcha, and it's not a gotcha.
So now, okay, here we go, you guys. So Gary is, like, so sanctimonious, like, sitting to the camera saying, like...
They all have done years and years of research as to why their guy might be the Zodiac killer. There are people trying to push Richard Gaikowski, Arthur Lee Allen, and Ted Kaczynski. But none of the other suspects can be included because of handwriting and fingerprints and no name in the cipher.
Well, David Orenchek is here to shed some light on the situation.
I build cryptology software for the FBI. And as we got into the details of the evidence that supposedly links his father to the killer, the evidence wasn't standing up to scrutiny.
In short, he knows what he's talking about. So he starts to dive into these ciphers and the evidence that Gary truly believes he sees in them. So we're back to that famous like 340 cipher. And that's the one where one of the many ciphers where Gary was just like, there's a random shape and that looks like an A and that looks like a V and that looks like a whatever.
I mean, it's the thing where he's saying that like Earl Van Best Jr. is written straight across the cipher backwards. And this guy, David, is like, that's super problematic.
Seems compelling because the entire name seems to fit. But there's a problem with this approach. What he's doing is taking some liberties, for instance, interpreting a circle to be the letter E. By taking these liberties, it increases the chances of finding a name. There's 20 symbols in each column, and the symbols can be interpreted different ways. Earl Van Best Jr. is only one out of 100,000 names that can be found using this method.
He's seeing what he wants to see.
We see the names, though. Did you see that? We see the screen where it's like, it's just populating the names and showing it straight across the cipher,
Yeah.
And there's like over 100,000 names that could be in there.
So, I love this kind of filmmaking. Maybe it's playing dirty. I don't know. But I needed a win here. I was really struggling with this, because this is where it starts to turn around. And Gary goes,
I am not a cipher expert, but I don't believe thousands of names can be found using all 17 columns. The Zodiac community then tried to discredit my fingerprint evidence. Okay, what about the other suspects? Do any of them have a scar on their right index finger? Shoot that one down.
And just for clarity, you guys, Gary's father, Earl Van Best Jr., had a scar on his finger that seemed to match almost identically to a scar in a fingerprint that the Zodiac left on Paul Stein's cab.
Yeah, but every time they show Gary something, he's like, yeah, but. So Gary's like, all right, fine. Yeah. They want to, how about this? How about we talk about the fingerprints and how the scars match up? Shoot that one down. The next thing we hear is, I'm an expert in fingerprints. And I'm like, yes. Yes, we're going to shoot it down. We're going to shoot that shit down, Gary.
It's Glenn Langenberger. Hey, girl, she's here to shoot that shit down.
The subject that the white line is being compared against has a scar on his right index finger. But the original blood print from the Zodiac is either the left index finger or it's the right ring finger. The only way it could be the right index is if the images were reversed.
So Glenn's like, all right, I'm going to make this quick. I got like a ton of shit to do. So Glenn is comparing these and he's like, so they're not even the same finger. They're the wrong finger. The image that Gary has is reversed. And according to Glenn, like we all have like scars and stuff on our fingers. And also it's not high res. So Glenn's like,
I'm not sure really what could be said about these fingerprints other than that they are generally fingerprints.
In conclusion, the only thing that these two fingerprints have in common is that they're both fingerprints. Bye. The end. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk.
I feel like he was standing up and taking his mic off as he was saying that because he had somewhere more important to be.
I have a Lagavulin with my name on it.
He's like, they were both fingerprints, and you can barely hear fingerprints.
Yeah, the thing about these fingerprints is that they're both fingerprints. The lift is where? God, I'm so late.
But guess what, girl? Gary has new evidence now that they didn't have when the book came out.
Doesn't he? How interesting. So ABC Primetime Live does a Zodiac special in 2003. That looks like it's from the early 90s. These graphics look like that shitty Zodiac Facts website. It's like the shaky thing. It's like the Zodiac Killer. It's so horrible.
Tonight, we return to one of the most enduring and chilling mysteries of the last 25 years. The unsolved case of the serial killer who called himself Zodiac.
So the thing about Zodiac is that he would always add this extra postage. Like he just really wanted to make sure his letters got to the Chronicle.
Can you imagine you murder all these people and then you're like writing to the San Francisco Chronicle to taunt them about it, but your letter gets returned for not enough postage?
He's like, God damn it.
Not on my watch.
So because there's all this extra postage, they're like, maybe the spit from the stamp could lead somewhere, right? Because this is the 60s. There's not stickers like we have today. So, it turns out, of course, they got some DNA, partials, but but maybe a little bit helpful. So they do this thing just to show you guys, we know our audience, right? You've seen all of this. Like, here's the DNA results, and they have to blur shit out.
This is in that ABC special.
Right, from 2003, but looks like it's from the 1800s. Right. So they blurred out this like really important information, like these specific genetic markers. We're not going to get into all the, it's just like genetic markings, whatever.
Yeah.
So Gary is like, it was a bad blur job, you guys.
It was a bad blur job, you guys.
And that old primetime documentary actually showed a blurred image of those 5 genetic markers. But it was a very poor job of blurring. So if you're really careful and stop it at the right moment, you can actually see what those values are.
So Gary's like, I just squinted real hard and I extracted the 5 genetic markers that they have on file for the Zodiac. And I'm like, at this point, like, viewers at home, who really believes this now? Like, honestly.
But you know who totally believes it? His friend Susan.
Gary did this first, and he wrote down what he thought they were. And then he called me up and he said, Susan, I want you to come over and watch this. And he said, Susan, I want you to write down what you think it is. And we came up independent of each other, exactly the same thing.
I'm like ZZ, like snoring, like eye roll emoji, like whatever. So, and you guys remember, because Gary squinted and Susan squinted and they wrote down blurred shit. They are now like, that's it. This is the genetic profile of the Zodiac Killer. Also, it was a partial match. Like, what are you talking about? So they take these nonsense numbers to some independent testing lab.
Where they also gave Gary's DNA so they could compare his DNA to the bad blur job DNA from the TV thing.
And the results say the DNA, quote, could not be excluded.
If the numbers Mr. Stewart provided are correct, there's a 97 to 99.8% probability that these markers originated from the Zodiac.
99.8% certain that my father was the Zodiac Killer.
And he just stares at the camera with that shit-eating grin, like, and what he's saying is, fuck the fingerprints, fuck the
handwriting, the picture, the location, the facts, anything. But here's what really stuck with me as we end episode 3. He's not out to prove, in this situation with the genetic matching, he's not out to prove that Earl Best is the Zodiac. He's out to prove that the Zodiac, whoever it is his father. You know what I mean?
God, I didn't even think of it that way, but you're absolutely right.
He just wants the Zodiac to be his dad, Earl Best or not.
Yeah.
That's what he wants.
Tell me one more time how you really hope you're wrong, Gary.
What are the odds? Enough.
All right, Zodiac episode, I'm just calling it Zodiac episode 4. What's this thing called again?
The most dangerous animal of all. I don't understand how.
All right, so episode 4 starts, it's like a rehash where Gary's saying like, once again, let me just remind you that based on the DNA evidence, there's a 99% chance that the Zodiac Killer was my father. Again, making the point, Earl Van Best Jr. or not, according to this like bogus DNA situation, the Zodiac Killer was definitely his dad.
Right. So remember that SFPD guy that Gary was talking to, John Hennessy, who was like in charge of the closed and inactive Zodiac case?
Yeah, and he's the one that Gary gave his DNA to.
Right. So he's just like, I hadn't heard from Hennessy in years. I'm like, yeah, because she got wise and was like, I'm not taking that guy's fucking phone calls. Keep that shit off my desk. I have stuff to do. So, and also because Hennessy like moved on. So there's a new guy in charge now, and his name is Gianrico Perucci.
When I met with Gary Stewart, he wanted to make sure that his DNA was actually done. It was actually analyzed. So I contacted the lab and I told him that the DNA had been analyzed. I told him that his father wasn't going to be excluded.
You guys, the semantics here are very important. Perucci says, yes, we ran your DNA, and I told him that his father wasn't going to be excluded. To me, this was like a fucking bomb, because, like, what is anybody who hears those words, what are they going to think? Of course they're going to think that, yeah, my dad's the Zodiac Killer.
Well, they're not listeners of this podcast, because every time that comes up, I scream about how that does not mean it's a match.
I'm just saying, like, at this point, Gary and I both are like, oh, shit, girl, that's kind of a big deal.
And the thing is, Perucci is just like, he's just saying the line and using the cop script. He doesn't know Gary the way we know Gary at this point.
Oh, right.
So he doesn't know like how careful and handholdy he has to be. He's just like doing his job.
1,000,000%. Hey, guess what, girl?
What?
The hot guy's here. Zach Feckheimer is here. He's cute as a button, and he is a PI, and he is on the case.
Gary's project was sparked initially off of a quest of a son trying to find his father, and that sparked my interest.
It's almost like a father and son PI team, because David, his dad, like taught Zach everything he knew. And also, Dave, Zach's dad, he knew Paul Avery and Dave Toschi.
I know.
I was like fangirling like vicariously.
Yeah, and his dad has been a PI in San Francisco for 100 years. He knew everybody involved in the Zodiac case. And so we're in good hands.
And at first, Zach is like just so trying to be nice because I'm like, oh, Zach knows. Zach totally knows what's up. Zach the PI. And he's like,
when I read the book, I was skeptical at first, but I kept coming across names and writing them down on a notebook next to my bedside table. Then when I'd go and run them through the system, it seems like Gary did a lot of pretty accurate genealogical research about Earl Van Best.
yeah, it seemed Gary did like a lot of accurate like genealogical research on Earl Van Best Jr. He did that. Like, that was good. And I'm like, great, not why we're here though, Zach.
No, and I love Zach because Zach just wants the facts. Zach wants to start by finding out like an addressology. He just wants to know every single place that Earl Van Best lived in the time before the Zodiac was active and when the Zodiac was active so that they can like sort of cross-reference it. And he's saying like,
Yeah, so a big challenge here is trying to figure out, was there overlap with where Earl was during the time that the Zodiac crimes were committed? And if there was, is there a connection with SFPD? And is there anything there that would suggest a cover-up, as Gary's put out in his book?
So he's not only finding the locations, but he's also going to look into this bullshit police cover-up that Gary's been screaming about for 3.5 episodes that also has no basis in reality.
Right, exactly. And this is where Zach's dad comes back and he's like,
I've never really believed that the San Francisco Police Department was a corrupt organization. But it wouldn't surprise me in the least if, through carelessness, sloppiness, or foolishness, they had failed to figure out who the Zodiac was.
Yeah, agreed. There was a lot going on. Jurisdictions be damned, no technology. Like, you guys, there was a lot happening.
Yeah.
Whatever. So Lynn, Judy's sister, is back. Girl, this is your time to shine.
I know.
Was it like looking in a mirror? Because she says, she's like, look, I was really interested in reading this book. Like, I mean, obviously, wouldn't you be? Oh my God. And she's like,
one of the reasons I wanted to read the book was because I thought, at last, I'm going to find out what really happened. But it starts off right away with things that are inaccurate and fabricated. I think my hair was on fire the first read-through of the book.
She was like, I think my hair is actually on fire. And she says it so calmly. Like, it's so funny because she's like, and I was so furious. I mean, it's almost as if my hair was on fire. And I'm like, you guys are the same person, only you scream about your fake hair being on fake fire.
My hair's on fire. Yeah. I love it. Well, because Lynn is saying, she's like, there are inaccuracies from the jump. She's like, the whole thing about the bus, remember, like, you know, we learned that Van was like waiting for Judy off the bus like for 5 days in a row and Judy wasn't interested, but then she finally was. And Van connects that to the Zodiac threatening to blow up a bus full of school children. It's like a big connection he makes. Lynn is like,
and there's a lot of talk about getting off a school bus. There were no school buses. We didn't get off a school bus. School buses were for elementary school children.
This is when I'm like, Gary, fuck you. His mom has been through so much trauma and your memory is altered when you've been through that. Fine, whatever. If you want to say she handled it wrong by saying I don't remember and she wasn't honest with her son about the father, like, fine. Yeah. But he's now like blaming his mother's memory and he's like,
I'll tell you, my first manuscript says streetcar. One day, my mother told me, honey, I was wrong about the streetcar. I got off the school bus.
Well, I just said what she said, like, and has no sympathy for maybe what she went through.
Because for me, it was a little bit about that, but also this is where Gary tries to blame everybody else for his book being made of lies. So he's blaming his mother for misremembering details. Later on, he's gonna blame Susan for being the one who actually wrote the book. Like, he's saying, I just wrote what people told me. And so we just keep going with the inaccuracies in the book. It's all just hogwash. Like, all of this is just wrong.
And then Susan and Gary did this like really disgusting thing where they would like recreate the police file reports in the book, but they turned them into scenes with dialogue, almost like fiction. So they would change the suspect or the Zodiac or whatever to Van or my father.
It was weird reading the book. I remember he would say like, and then my father came out from behind the tree and murdered those kids.
And I'm like, this is so vile. Honestly, HarperCollins, like, what are you doing?
But the best part about this whole thing is that Judy is saying like,
after the book was published, Susan called me and I said to her, why did you have to make the dialogue so preposterous? And she said, well, those are all right from the police reports. And I said, if that was your investigation, then I rest my case.
That's when Judy realized you guys didn't do any actual research. All you did was get police reports and turn those into scenes, but you didn't investigate this at all.
And you guys, this is when I got quite an education about the book industry and HarperCollins and all these people. You guys, fact-checking kind of isn't a thing. Who knew?
You would think that a big publisher like HarperCollins has a budget for fact-checking, but they don't. The book publishing industry, they don't require it. They need to sell books that are as compelling and maybe sensational as they could possibly be. And so all of the responsibility for making sure that the work is true and accurate and not copied or other things is actually put on the author.
It's this horrible cycle where the writer, like this guy Gary, gets so inside his head and so inside the story, and he believes the story so much, it's easy for him to make mistakes. He has no perspective. And this super cute, nerdy guy from BuzzFeed,
it's very hard to kind of look up one day and say, wait a second, have we taken a few steps too far? And your editor's not going to say that because they want to sell the book too. Everybody's invested in this guy being the Zodiac killer.
I think what we're getting at in this section is that, I don't know that Gary was out to lie. I think Gary just believed the story so wholeheartedly, he was willing to tell some half-truths to get the book there.
Well, first of all, they call it a narrative touch-up, which I cannot even fucking believe. And then, did you catch this? They OJ us.
No.
Because they're like, well, we weren't making factual claims. We were just setting the scene about how, maybe, possibly, most likely could have happened. And I'm like, don't you OJ me. Right. Don't do it. I won't have it. And look, we say this all the time. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, his dad really is the Zodiac killer. And he really solved one of the most famous cold cases of all time. You would not need to embellish.
Right.
You wouldn't have to do a narrative touch-up, whatever the fuck that is. The truth is enough.
I know. And so Hot Zach is back, and at this point, he's compiled a complete address history for Van. It's a timeline comparison with where the Zodiac was. And now he starts knocking down things that are in the book. So he tells us...
So in the book, Gary says that Earl lived at 797 Bush Street in 1969. The story goes that Paul Stein picked up his fare 2 blocks from 797 Bush, but I don't see any evidence that he lived there in 1969. He did live there in 1967, which is 2 years prior to the murder of Paul Stein.
He didn't live there. That's a lie in the book.
Right. And this is where we get deep into Gary backtracking and Susan backtracking and double backtracking, and they're both trying to blame it on each other. We get a lot of he said, she said, literally. Because Gary's like, I just told Susan what happened. All I did, I was like, Susan, this happened, and this happened. And Susan's the one who turned it into a whole book section. And then Susan's like...
Each time I was like, did that really happen? Then I would have an email that said, here's William saying it right here. There were certain things where I did have to take a small leap of faith. But I got to a point where when Gary told me something, I didn't doubt him because he always had evidence to back it up.
But the thing that we learned here is that, I don't think anyone was out to do anything bad. I just think they weren't using best practices. And Susan is saying that, anytime I had a question, Gary would show me a document. But the document was an email. It was an email from a friend saying, oh, yes, I remember when this happened. It wasn't an actual legal document saying this thing happened. So it's it's just a memory document. And then Susan was saying, it just got to the point where this happened so often that I just trusted it. I didn't even question him anymore.
Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Do you think that Gary made up those email addresses and wrote those emails and sent them to himself? Because I do.
I don't know.
Yeah.
When we find out that we're going to find out in a minute that he actually truly altered a document.
Yeah, that's where I get to that's him actively trying to lie.
Yes. Girl, can we talk about handwriting analysis again?
It's the Zodiac case. Where would we be without handwriting?
So remember this guy, Michael Washkill or whatever his name is? He's the handwriting guy from episodes past. And he was the one who compared, this is so absurd, I cannot get over it. He was the one who compared the marriage certificate, which apparently Van wrote, to the Zodiac letters.
So he says this thing, which I think is ridiculous and dangerous. He's like, I'm convinced 100% that whoever wrote the marriage certificate is the Zodiac killer. And I'm like, oh my God. It's so ridiculous. So Gary tells us that his mom told him, look, I saw Van fill out the marriage certificate. So that's what that handwriting is. But it turns out Van didn't fill out the marriage certificate. The priest or the minister, whoever filled out the marriage certificate.
As part of my due diligence and follow-on, I contacted the church where they got married. I wanted to find out, do they have examples of the preacher's writing? And they did, which caused me to come to the virtually certain opinion. The minister Edward Flagger wrote the marriage certificate.
And instead of being like, oh, okay, so the priest filled it out and Gary's full of shit, the handwriting guy makes this gigantic leap and he's like...
Because we know that the police sketch of the eyewitnesses of the Zodiac matches Earl Van Best Jr. It raises the question, did the minister and Earl Van Best Jr. work together, one writing the letters, one doing the killing?
Earl Van Best is the Zodiac killer, but the priest is the guy who wrote all his letters. I fucking solved it. And I'm like, what am I watching?
And he's saying it straight face to the camera. It's like, what? And it's just because he's made his life being a handwriting expert, and that's bogus science. We all know that now. And he's just trying to save face.
Right. And the thing is, Gary doesn't like this theory for the most fucked up reason ever. Because Gary needs the Zodiac killer to 100% be his dad, both the killing and the letters. So he can't have some priest writing the letters. Like, it's Zodiac 100% or bust.
But when they're spouting this theory about the priest, they're slow zooming in on a picture of him with this really creepy, like, horror movie music. I was like, you guys, this poor priest, he didn't do this. He's a man of God.
He also married a 14 and 27-year-olds. Just saying.
That's true. That's totally true.
I mean,
totally true.
Different time aside, fuck that.
Total garbage.
So Gary's like, fine, okay, fine. The handwriting, okay. The fingerprints, okay, whatever. My dad is still the Zodiac killer. I hate to say it.
Because of the DNA. He's saying the one thing that Gary is holding onto is this DNA evidence that wasn't in the book. He's like, none of the rest of this matters. My DNA matches the Zodiac killer.
Right, because they put it on ABC News, blurted out, he squinted, and now thinks he figured out the numbers. That's where we are, right?
But so you guys, get ready. We got to meet producer Harry. Harry Phillips is the guy who made this documentary, like in 2003 or whatever. Harry is here to spill all the tea.
Right, and so Harry Phillips, again, taking his mic off, basically, because he's like, I just don't understand. Like, it's so obvious to him. It's just so obvious.
He also came dressed for the interview, which I love. I love that he's like that TV guy that usually probably shows up to like the control room in flip-flops and shorts and a t-shirt. But he's on camera. He ran a fucking comb through his hair. He came ready to talk.
He is this series Diane Diamond. On top of it, knows his shit. Very just like 1, 2, 3, bada bing, bada boom. Let's go. Cocktail party. Come on.
And so he tells us that the bad blur job numbers that represented the Zodiac killer's DNA sequence, those were fake numbers, girl. And he basically just says like,
the DNA profile that you saw on television was not provided by the San Francisco Police Department. That would be reckless.
He's like, girl, we didn't even have access to that information. Who's going to show that shit to me?
You idiots. Right? You morons who are buying this hook, line, and sinker. I'm looking directly at you, Gary, said Harry.
He literally is like, we would never do that. That would be reckless. Like, he says it as like an afterthought. And the reason they would never do that is just in case some idiot, some nut is trying to connect himself to the Zodiac killer. That's why you would never do it, Gary.
Yeah, they didn't want some hack getting a book deal with HarperCollins and spreading all this misinformation and ruining lives.
This all fucking comes to a head in real time, you guys. The producers of this documentary, the one that we're watching, they are telling Gary this information in person. And this is where Gary starts to melt down. And you know, they've got like 5 different cameras on him. So they do that thing where it's not going well, where they start showing him from different angles. You're doing it with your hands. And they literally, I don't know if you noticed this, but they're like, it's almost as though they emailed me and they're like, Patrick, girl, could we borrow that Garbage Minute music? And they're playing the Garbage Minute music underneath him.
I said to Mike, Bravo Housewives music. Here we go.
The value of the allele may have been changed, may have been blurred. It doesn't matter. The fact that my father can't be eliminated as Zodiac suspect means all 5 of these match. So they've got a single value, not a double value of the loci. They've got at least one of the 2 for that are the Zodiac.
This goes on for 5 minutes. He is talking and I actually tried to follow what he was saying, and it doesn't make any sense.
Normally, you know me, I'd be like, oh, you know I paused and wrote that shit down. No, because he is talking in circles. He so desperately needs his dad to be the Zodiac killer, and it's so sad and weird and fucked up, but he's not hearing it.
Exactly. The way that like this part ends with Gary is Gary saying like, well, forget the documentary thing, forget the blurred values. That guy Perucci, he tested my DNA. He has the actual Zodiac killer values, and he's the one who told me that my dad couldn't be excluded. So like that's still the thing that's like, okay, let's see where this goes.
Yeah.
So now, you guys, the other big thing that happens here is we learn that Gary falsified a police report. So the whole big thing in the book is that Van spent time in Atascadero, that mental hospital where they put like the sexual deviants with like the shock therapy and all that.
Supposedly with Arthur Lee Allen, the main Zodiac suspect.
Right. And so like this is a linchpin of the book for a million reasons. Susan's going to tell us it gives him the right psychosis to be a serial killer. It puts him with Arthur Lee Allen. It makes all of it possible. And in the book, the police report that says that he went to Atascadero is printed with it saying that he went to Atascadero. And now the filmmakers are confronting us and Susan with the fact that when they looked at the original police report, it was identical to the police report in the book, except in the book, the Atascadero piece had been added.
He photoshopped it. He's lying to Susan. He's lying to us. He's lying to everybody.
And Susan does this thing where she's looking at the camera because now everyone's getting busted in real time. And she does that thing where she's like,
I can't speak to that. The Cleats report that I saw had a Atascadero in it. Can you give me a minute?
They don't turn the camera off. And I was like, Suzette, it's a hot mic. We've been through this before. Don't, and then all of a sudden you just hear her in the back going,
yeah, she gets up and walks away, ... for a cocktail, I'm sure. Because, girl. So Susan's like, motherfucker. And then it's like 1 month later. And I'm like, ooh. So she stewed for a month. She was just furious for a month. Let's go.
She took that pink gun and went into the grass and shot that gun for the entire month.
I like to think that the footage we see at the beginning is from this 1 month later. And then they just put it right at the top. So she's devastated.
Yeah. And because she's been so cocky and confident this whole time, and now she is mea culpaing all over the place.
But she's also doing this thing that we hate. She's acting like it happened to her. Girl,
yes.
Do your research, do your job. She's like, I read some suspicious email. Gary told me that his dad was a Zodiac killer. I believed it. What was I supposed to do? Research it? And I'm like, yes.
Right.
Also, remember Nancy's scale? We have a Susan scale here. Either you're Susan Simpson or you're Susan Mustafa. You choose. The time is now. Who do you want to be? You want to research the shit out of anything and solve some things like Susan Simpson?
Totally.
Or do you want to do this?
find the goddamn facts cover sheet or don't you?
Honestly, it's now or never. It's up to you. You choose. There's only one right answer, by the way.
So the whole linchpin that Gary had been clinging to for forever is this Perucci guy who's now in charge of the Zodiac case, had said to Gary that he can't exclude Gary's father as the Zodiac killer based on the DNA. So Susan Mustafa, in an attempt to save her ass, somehow gets this guy to meet her at a bar. They meet at a bar.
Can we talk about this bar?
Yeah.
It's I think it's kind of cool, burlesque, gothy. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But underneath where they're sitting, there are these old-timey chains and wrist cuffs under the table.
What?
Hanging down. And I don't know. I'm like, I think, is it an S&M bar, which is great, or a burlesque? It's kind of, but the point is, Susan picked the joint. Right. There's no question. She picked the place. So Perucci's like,
I wasn't referring to the DNA when I told him that he couldn't be excluded. Okay, what I was trying to tell him was, and I think he did misinterpret me telling him, no, I can't exclude your father. Mm-hmm. I can't exclude your father as a Zodiac, only because we don't have the knowledge that the Zodiac actually touched or licked the stamp. Gary's DNA was checked by our lab, and that's all I can tell you.
So he holds her hand through this and explains it to her like she's 5, which I understand. I would need that too. If I were talking to Perucci, I'd be like, girl, explain to me like I'm 5. And he's like, girl, I was just doing that cop thing where I'm like, I apprehended the vehicle means I just got in the car.
I don't know. I'm calling a little bit of bullshit on this. This is the moment.
Okay, let's go.
Well, I don't have anything to say here except for the fact that when you see Perucci earlier in the film, I went back and watched it, and he is saying...
And I told him that the DNA had been analyzed. I told him that his father wasn't going to be excluded.
He says it, And now he's saying, well, what I meant by that was X, Y, and Z, and I'm not buying it. I'm not saying that his dad is a Zodiac killer, but Perucci is not. He's not going to sit down with Susan Mustafa for a fucking FX documentary and spill the tea. I think there is more behind his eyes that he is not saying.
Interesting. And I wonder if maybe it's just because he kind of wanted to be involved.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a cover up. I don't think there's any kind of secret DNA connection. I think he just this sounds fun. I haven't been to a bar in a while.
Right. But But so we're back with Hot Zach. Guess what, you guys? It turns out Susan is the one who hired Hot Zach. So Hot Zach, the PI,
he's been shooting down all the lies. He's the one who's like, well, actually, and it's a good well, actually, because he's right.
Totally. And he was hired by Susan. So now Susan is sitting in this guy's living room, and he's like, so here's a couple other things that didn't hold up, girl. That whole Mikado thing.
What I've been able to tell, the Japanese Empire had banned the Mikado, and it only became released publicly after the end of World War II in 1945. But the Van Best family leaves Japan in 1941.
Remember, the whole idea was that, like, Van's family saw the Mikado in Japan and they sent the playbill home.
Right.
And, like, the whole final thing here is that, like, there's this big empty space in Van's timeline about, like, where he was in 1970, basically. Like, where was Van in 1970?
And it's those couple years where it was, like, the height of the Zodiac. Before he ever disappeared, it was that, like, 68 to 71. Like, those big years.
Yeah, and it turns out we have a letter from Van's daughter. So Gary's half-sister that he's never met. And she's like...
They all moved back to Austria, where I was born, in 1970. A year later, my father left my mother and went back to the States.
Susan looks at the camera and she's like...
If Earl Van Best Jr. was not in the country in 1970, he couldn't have been the Zodiac killer. Case closed.
Case closed.
It was like the most body movingest moment of the whole thing.
It was so body moving. And that's from Don't Fuck with Cats, you guys.
But it really ends with Susan. We're in Susan's living room.
Oh my God.
And Susan...
Oh my God. Because it fades out and then it fades back in.
I know.
And I'm like, ooh.
What's happening? And Susan I love her for being so out loud and proud about this. She's like...
Today's Friday the 13th. So I think tonight I'm just gonna get drunk as shit and sit outside on that nice little lanai overlooking San Francisco and burn the fuck out of that book. Is that what you're gonna put on film?
And we have Bravo Housewife music because it's like fun music again because we're back to Susan and the bar. Yes! I'm pretty sure she owns. She must have a piece of that. She's gotta. It's so on brand for her.
Oh my God, you guys, we did the most dangerous animal of all. I'm so glad we did this, girl.
I'm so glad you finally, after 7 hours, know the name of this goddamn thing.
I know. Are you proud of me?
I mean, yeah, if I have to be. If you need that in this moment, then yeah, I'll give it to you.
I appreciate it. You guys, don't forget, if you want more fun, laughs, good times.
Fun, laughs, good times.
Hang out with Jillian and I on the Patreon. Over 140 full bonus episodes of TCO to get right now. $5 a month, you guys. It's all of our series. It's Don't F with Cats, The Jinx, Making a Murderer, Serial, The Staircase. You know it all.
Everything's ad-free. We also have, like, depending on the tier, we have, like, ringtones, monthly surprises. We're doing, like, these Zoom hangouts, which is fun. We have one tomorrow. That's so fun.
I know. And so you know where to go. Just go to patreon.com/truecrimeobsessed or go to our website, click on the Patreon link. I'm going to ask you guys to check out the Obsessed Network website to see all the podcasts we're making. Everyone's looking for new content. Go check it out. The website's really great. Jillian and I look amazing on it.
I mean, I'm doing some shoulder moves. I know they can't see me, but I'm very excited about the website.
Girl, tell the people what we're doing next.
We are doing Killing Versace.
It's Versace for our Showgirls fans.
Killing Versace, the hunt for a serial killer. We are not laughing about any of this, by the way. We're laughing at ourselves.
It's a bonkers Oxygen documentary from a couple years ago. It's about that serial killer, Andrew Cunanan, who killed a whole bunch of people, including Gianni Versace. Guys, it's super gay.
It's real gay, and it's very birdcagey, which is also gay, because it all happens in South Beach.
Miami. Oh my God.
It's horrible. You know, I knew about this murder because I was alive when it happened, but I didn't know a lot about it, and oh my God.
I know.
The mismanagement of every goddamn police force or with the FBI. I mean, we're all at fault here, it feels like. It feels like I did something wrong too, because everyone did something wrong in this thing.
Don't forget to find us on the social media, you guys. True Crime Obsessed Podcast on the Instagram. Just go follow us there. We're doing stories and lives, and when I'm editing the podcast, I do fun outtakes in the stories. The stories are the best. I'm at Patrick Hines _ on Instagram, at Patrick Hines on the Twitter. GP, where are you?
Oh my God, I'm at Jillian with a G. I almost don't know what this is. This is so weird.
Either.
We're not doing it. I haven't said my own social media in a year.
I know.
At this point.
We're just mixing. We're keeping it real over here. We're mixing it up.
Promise me you'll use the hair on fire little GIF sticker when we talk about you and Sister Lynn both having your hair on fire.
Absolutely.
I mean, come on. It writes itself.
All right, we love you, you guys.
Thanks for hanging.
All right, bye.
Bye.
a larger-than-life fashion icon.
Gianni Versace was not for the faint of heart.
And a wannabe celebrity.
Everything he told everybody was probably a lie.
With a deadly obsession.
He was determined to be remembered, and he was willing to kill for fame.
A brazen murder that rocked the country.
Broad daylight, steps of his home. Andrew just very boldly crossed the street, walked up right behind him, and shot him.
911 emergency. We just heard gunshots right outside. He's on the steps of the house.
Versace was shot twice in the head at close range on the steps of his house in South Beach, Miami.
You took somebody away at the height of their career, at the height of their happiness, devastated a family.
The culmination of a cross-country rampage.
It was a very brutal killing. Many, many blows to the face and to the back of the head.
It was very clear that Cunanan was a gay man killing gay men.
Now, inside the demented mind of a serial killer.
There was no way to predict what this man would do.
Lots of questions. Why?
He was good at lying. He was good at deception. He was good at hiding in plain sight.
The massive manhunt.
Incredible. Never had that much pressure on me, ever.
And the frantic race to stop the bloodshed.
The expectation was, yes, there will be another murder.
My vocal cords are warm the hell up. You want to know why?
Why?
Because it's a heat box. It's 800
I
degrees.
know.
It's nice. You know, I can work and take a steam.
Yeah. Like at one point in the history of TV making, somebody decided to take graphics seriously. I don't know what day it was, but it should be a goddamn holiday.
Yeah.
You guys, maybe the spin of the snap will take us somewhere.
I know. I just need my bow tie, and I'll be exactly like Dave Toschi. Gary is like, it was a bad blur job, you guys.
It was a bad blur job, you guys.
A bad blur job.
I used to get bad blur jobs all through my youth until I learned. I literally have the note. It took till episode 4, but finally there's a hot guy here.